A big news story now. Kyrgyz President Sooronbai Jeenbekov has resigned after 10 days of unrest following a disputed election. Jeenbekov says he wanted to prevent clashes between security forces and protesters. In a statement issued by his office, Jeenbekov said, and I quote, "I am not clinging to power. I do not want to go down in the history of Kyrgyzstan as a president who allowed bloodshed and shooting on its people. I have taken the decision to resign." Now, Kyrgyzstan has been in a state of turmoil since the 4th of October parliamentary election, which the opposition rejected after Jeenbekov's allies were declared the winners. The results sparked massive protests, with thousands taking to the streets and seizing government buildings in the capital of Bishkek. The protest resulted in the election results being subsequently declared invalid. However, the protesters did not relent, demanding Jeenbekov's resignation. The Kyrgyz president had announced his resignation last week, but then later delayed his exit, saying that he would stay in office until a new election was held. Earlier on Wednesday, Jeenbekov accepted Parliament's choice of Senator Zaporov to be the Prime Minister. Zaporov, who has been freed from prison last week by his supporters, and he has been named the new Prime Minister. He has said that Jeenbekov must leave office within days to honor his pledge to step down. And the Central Asian nation of Kyrgyzstan that borders China has experienced political turmoil for years. Jeenbekov is now the third president to be toppled in a popular uprising since 2005. Now, we are being joined by senior journalist Christopher Schwartz from Bishkek for more on this. Thank you for being with us. Now, Jeenbekov has resigned, saying, and I'll quote what his statement read, "I do not wish to go down in Kyrgyzstan's history as a president who shed blood and shot his own citizens."
Yes, that's because of the previous presidents, especially Sooronbai Jeenbekov, who in 2010, when he was being overthrown, did authorize lethal force against protesters.
Right, now there has been turmoil since these results were announced. The opposition rejected his winning, saying that after his allies were declared the winners, they were accusing them of being involved in vote buying.
Just to be clear, the president of Kyrgyzstan cannot formally be a member of a political party. So the protests were about two political parties, one of which is generally considered to be affiliated with the president because of the prominence of his brother in that party. The other party is supposedly financed by a former customs official who's involved in a lot of black market activities, who is said to be a kind of on-again, off-again ally of the president. And the protests basically were concerned that together with a third party, which is sort of the party of businessmen, they would form a kind of pseudo-majority coalition in the Kyrgyz parliament. And it was the vote buying and the use of what are called administrative resources when government employees are forced to vote one way or the other that sparked the combination of a potential pseudo majority in parliament and the electioneering is what sparked the protests. But there are increasing concerns about who the protesters were.
Right. And Christopher, saying that he would stay in office last week until a new election was held, what now? Has a date been set for new elections? Where do we go from here?
It's very confusing. So his resignation is not effective immediately. It must be accepted by the parliament. And furthermore, they do have a new speaker of parliament. He is expressing skepticism as to whether he constitutionally can become acting president, because what he is saying is that technically the current parliament was voted out. It's very confusing, though, because the Central Election Committee has actually annulled the elections, and they need to meet again, I'm told, no later than November 6th to decide when new elections will be held. So it's a very, one way to think about Kyrgyzstan is it's kind of a semi-rule of law society. So things can be very formal at one moment and then very informal the next moment. So it can be a bit confusing for those of us on the outside to understand everything. And so it's not yet clear how this is going to shake out.
Right. And what is the situation like on the ground now? Has this move quelled the protests and the unrest?
Well, I have to say, Bishkek is strangely quiet at the moment. I was just down in the center in Alatoy Square, and it was empty. And that's usually where the protests occur. I took a taxi to get here for this report, and the taxi drivers over the phone were talking to each other about whether there will be meetings as they call it, or not. Meanwhile, supporters of the new Prime Minister, Saro Japarov, have occupied an abandoned hotel that is down the street from the presidential residence. The presidential residence reportedly has 500 police inside of it as we speak. So there's a potential for a showdown there. But that's occurring in the kind of southwest corner of Bishkek, far away from the population center.
Right. We'll leave it there. Christopher, thank you very much for joining us for all the latest coming out of Bishkek.